Awesome. So our panel is entitled Preparing Your Organization for AI. It will be moderated by Charles Post, Managing Counsel and Director at BNY Mellon. We'll also have David Robinson, Chief Data Scientist at DataCamp, Mike Galvin, Executive Director, Corporate Training at Metis, Gordon Liu, EVP, U.S. Head of Global Risk Analytics at HSBC, Wendy Callaghan, Chief Innovation Legal Officer at AIG, and Patrick Nussbaumer, Enablement Program Director at DataRobot. The panelists are appearing on their own behalves and not on behalf of their companies. Nothing stated by the panelists participating constitutes either legal or investment advice. Let's welcome our panelists to the stage.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm glad you made it to day 2. What we're going to do is just go down the line here and just do a brief introduction by each person of who they are and where they're from.
Hey, everyone. My name is... Can everyone hear me? Hey, so I'm Mike Galvin. I'm the Executive Director of Corporate Training at Metis. My background's in math and machine learning. I've been doing that for a while. And most recently at Metis, we work in data science and analytics training for companies across the globe.
I'm Dave Robinson. I'm Chief Data Scientist at DataCamp. At DataCamp, we provide online courses to train both individual users and companies to make them more data fluent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Nussbaumer. I am on the enablement team over at DataRobot and have an electrical engineering background, but have spent my time either implementing systems or helping others to learn how to use their systems and their data.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Callaghan. I'm AIG's Chief Innovation Legal Officer. And my background is as a technology attorney. In recent years, I've been focusing on emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, telematics.
I'm Gordon Liu, heading the U.S. Global Risk Analytics team for HSBC. So we are the first line defense. We're developing models for trading the investment banking side as well as the commercial banking and also the operational risk and also the transaction monitoring. So it's a broad cover scope of model developments.
And I'm your moderator, Charles Post. I'm Managing Counsel Director of BNY Mellon. I support the firm's digitization efforts as a business lawyer, leveraging emerging technologies. So with that, let's get started with the Preparing Organization for AI. We're going to save, just so structure the discussion, we're going to save the questions for the end. So if you do have questions, please hold off the end. We're going to save about 5-10 minutes for questions. So with that, I think there's a lot of value in understanding whether the best idea is always the idea that gets implemented, or is it the most executable, is the most widely adopted or supported? And what are the different paths for organizations to adopt AI, as well as tangential technologies as part of that discussion? How is it fostered? What are the types of stakeholders you need? So with that, let's begin the discussion. Let's begin at the beginning, as I've heard. Will each of you describe AI and machine learning? We'll bucket those together in 3 words.
I'll start. It's kind of a tough one, but I would say learning from data, maybe.
Good.
I'd say worth the hype.
See, David messed me up right before this event. He told me his, and then got me thinking, so I'm all out of place here. But I'm going to say expertise, speed, and trust.
So I'm going to do it in 2 words, borrowing from the book, How to Build an AI Organization in 90 Days, Intelligent Software.
I would say there are going to be two sets. One is the general, more broader, and I would say that's the machine emulating human. But I'm going to say the narrow one, so not going to be that too broad, and going to be, from our perspective, is going to be more efficient algorithms.
Great. So let's just dive right in. Have you all seen AI adopted in various firms or companies? For example, is it going to be a top-down approach, or is it starting in some small business group, not at the top of the house, and it's kind of evolving from there? And maybe you've seen both, but understanding your perspectives on this, I think, is important in terms of adoption and traction. So whoever wants to begin, jump right in. Gordon? I know you
Right.
want to, you have a,
I would say yes, we do see that, right? So I'm giving you one example in here for HSBC UK. So the one previously we're using passwords for customer as a password for customer login, and we do get about each year about 100 million GBP loss
wow.
as the tag on those. But later on, we actually adopting another one using the voice as the passwords. So it's much better. So we actually avoid of that about 100 million loss. Of course, then later on, there are going to be some other evolving from the attacking side. They're going to be using some more advanced the algorithm to get actually still hack in. Now, I think so we're going to get more combined different algorithm for that part. It's not going to be just purely passwords, not purely the voice. It's going to be a combination of multiple things to make it more secure. So that's I would consider as the AI itself, right? Only human being can do previously. You can emulate or to see who is distinguished of different voice of your friends, of your family. But you're not going to do that for 100 millions of customers, but a machine can. So that's what I was saying. Emulate a more efficient algorithm, and only thing is doing better than individual humans.
That's interesting. It sounds like it evolved out of a particular use case that was kind of loud and visible at your firm. What about, yeah?
Yeah, so we see a lot of different things. What we don't see is a company that just says, oh, we want to be this AI-driven company, and they have this top-down approach and just become AI-driven, right? We often see either an executive-sponsored specific project that starts and is successful and builds some momentum, or we see organizations that have groups of data scientists, but they can't keep up with the demand. So then they start to figure out what else can we do to try to move in that direction. And then oftentimes a lot of that depends on educating business around them on how to work with not only data scientists, but how to work with data science, how to trust data science, how to talk, how to embed it in your processes and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then when that starts to happen, you start to see some organic growth, but at least from my experience, you don't often see that organic growth start with it. Either it's more of like some sort of sponsorship, or there's a group already with skill sets there that they want to do more.
Okay, so it sounds like you've seen it both ways, top down, bottom up, but there's always needs to be an executive sponsor in the meeting to be able to buy into what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. What about from the educational standpoint? Who are these business people and stakeholders that we have to be at the table, who need to know, who may know something, or may know some mainstream concepts of what AI is and thinks of Terminator and Skynet, and and there's others that have the more of a data science approach to it, anchored into the practicalities of modeling and building out a data set. So what are your experiences, particularly in the education front, of who are the folks you're interacting with who are trying to come up a learning curve today and potentially previously?
So we see it through various heads of different functions throughout organizations. Kind of similar to the previous comment. I've seen both kind of bottom-up and top-down approaches. Most successful with top-down approaches when you have an executive sponsor. And so we work with, a lot of times we see someone who's in charge of an analytics COE, AI division, machine learning division, and they are trying to get broader adoption throughout the entire organization. And so a lot of the training we do is actually for the broader audience who's not technical, to build out the fluency and literacy of that workforce in their executive team, so you can actually increase the cross-functional collaboration and kind of build a better culture of AI and data throughout.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's worth dividing those three segments of you have training for practitioners, for stakeholders, and then for executives. Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that it's worth executives getting some data fluency, some understanding of how they can talk about it, and we all agree that practitioners should be working sort of at the cutting edge, building their skills as strong as possible. I think the really interesting question for me is the future of stakeholder roles and education for them. People like product managers, people like engineers who are traditional software engineers. what kinds of skills do those groups need to build? I would say the more PMs I've seen build skills in advanced analytics, the more effectively they can work with AI and data products. And also say engineers need to building skills in machine learning and data engineering can be a really useful interface to work with AI
That's very helpful.
practitioners.
Who's not at the table who should be?
I would say everyone should be on the table, right?
That's a good answer.
It's when we see you want to be more efficient and identify bottleneck, and so not just talk about machine learning. Everyone is on the table. They were all supportive, and for business side, for marketing side, right? You want to offer the customer what kind the product you should offer. You're going to be do their business journey, their customer journey. You want to know who actually is doing what, and from their group, and they actually did not do. This guy, I should be going to shopping in somewhere, but he didn't do. But his group of customers, similarly, they're already doing that, right? So that's the offering for this part. And additionally, want to making some more profits. You want to see what kind of customer making a good profits, but some kind of customer, they are not. So why is that the case? So if you put into the business case together, and I would say everyone's on the table. But if you only talk about, say, this is going to be AI, and it's going to be difficult. And for efficiency perspective, operations, I think is everyone see, is inefficiency in our whole organization or industry. But that's most of the places that's going to be applied for AI or machine learning for
There's
those.
a lot of human APIs.
That's human operations, but they may not be the ones on the table. So.
Right. Interesting. Wendy, what do you think?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit later about some of the regulatory considerations, but one of the important things to understand is that various regulators are looking at internal governance and what kind of internal governance is there around vetting the use of AI. And so attorneys, Charles, should be at the table.
Agreed.
Agreed, as well as regulatory folks, risk, of course, the data scientist, IT, operational. So it's really, in terms of the governance, it's very much a cross-functional conversation.
Interesting. So in terms of outside of the educational front, you have the practical front, who gets to interact with the AI, not necessarily for the client-facing applications, but internally at different organizations. Is AI and machine learning the exclusive domain of data scientists, and how should businesses and other stakeholders be able to interact with this technology or this framework?
Yeah, I think it's an important question because it's not just for data scientists or ML engineers. It's really for everyone, and so you need people within the business to identify the appropriate problems that are right for them, and to come to the data scientists and and ask for help the appropriate way. And the data scientists might not necessarily know what's practical, what are the metrics of success, how the business is going to actually realize value from what they're doing, what issues could come across as an end user, who's the actual person who's going to be using what they create. And so I think that's an important thing to
it sounds like there's a gap
for
of subject matter expertise in terms of what the business understands the data scientists are bringing to the table, and vice versa.
Right.
And how do you bridge those gaps?
So a lot of it is actually with education.
Okay.
Right? So as I mentioned before, we do a lot of data literacy training. So how do you teach product, software engineers, executives, managers, whoever it may be, to identify problems, what the appropriate project management workflow is, what are use cases, terminology, even appropriate timelines for a data science or ML AI project, what an appropriate output is, alternative data sets, these types of things.
Do you also educate, to Wendy's point, about governance and how it should be perceived outside your organization, within your organization, or fitting into the organization?
So we don't hit on as much of some of the governance issues, but I agree from my experiences that definitely a need for people to know what's going on.
Exactly. What do you think?
I think we do some training around things like data anonymization, data privacy, and data ethics. I think those are some I think that those are things that can be left off the table. I think most healthcare companies are certainly familiar with working with something like HIPAA, but something like GDPR is much newer technology, and there's a worthwhile place for education in terms of how is it being applied in practice and how might it change applications of artificial intelligence. I think particularly in areas like algorithmic bias, it's becoming an increasingly important issue.
Okay. This is more of a general, kind of take it back to more of a general theme. Is it more hype out there in terms of the use cases? And I know you mentioned before, or how real is it? What kind of traction is it getting? Are we headed towards an AI winter, or are we headed towards an AI spring?
I would say it's the January 2nd of the year.
Exactly.
So it's really just the starting. And I think I was seeing why just the narrow definition. If you go into the broader definition, so machine try to emulate the human beings. How many things we're doing, including the design of these algorithms, right? So that's not there yet, but everything else we try to do, there's still many things is manual. So now is to the point, I think is the other keynote talk about is the data, computational power, and also the algorithm all together, right? So, and from that perspective, is really just starting. And I think are we ready to be there? I think certainly everyone want to go there. Is a hype or not? Yes, is a hype in the sense we're not going to do to the machine going to design the better methodology than the human yet. Every machine learning, every AI methodology is still designed by the human beings. No?
So lots of hype, still nascent technology.
But
still nascent,
right, from that sense, right, not afraid yet. I don't think it's going to be disaster coming and the Terminator to the human being yet. But I do think it is very solid starting. Everything we can see. Previously, many things human being doing. Now the machine can do that already. You do everything. Everyone not have a phone. You can speak, and it's already text coming to you, right? Or the different things, you ask questions, you're going to come into you. You ask a Siri to take you to a home. They're going to give you an address or different things, right?
But it sounds like you're also bifurcating financial services from like the retail space of our everyday lives. That has become more, we've become more acclimated in our
right. For
daily
financial
lives.
service itself, I think it's everyone. Initially, when you application for credit card, it's going to be human being to approve. But now I would say 99 or 95% is automatically approving already. That's replacing the human that decision making. And for some business banking, corporates, and the trading, right? I heard a statistic for trading is 75% of trading volume is coming from machine already. It's algorithm trading. So it's only very small proportion is going to do that. I would say it's more and more the financial services is coming from decision making or actions coming from machine.
But I think there's still a long runway.
Yeah,
so the hype is real, but there's where we're falling short from a training perspective is just teaching people what can AI do practically for them all across your organization. So what's helping is the phone and Siri and all these things. People are starting to be more comfortable with it, but a lot of people don't realize, how can I ask new questions and how can AI help me all across my business? From whether you're in IT, can AI help legal? Like there's use cases all across the organization that are just untapped that may result in a lot of value. So a big focus of the training, it can just be as simple as what's the difference between a classification model, regression model? What types of business questions can you ask? And then try to get people to think for more curiosity. Like if you could ask any question, what would it be to help your job? And then start thinking about what decisions might you make for that. And then it could turn into, and what ethical considerations do you need to make if you're asking that particular question? Who do you need to get involved? So there's a huge area of getting everyone in the organization more comfortable with, hey, it's not just data scientists, and we're not trying to undermine data scientists' role. It just, that doesn't change, but trying to up-level everyone to be more comfortable talking about it, asking new questions, and then that drives more motivation, more curiosity, being part of something bigger, having a change, and that helps get get the ball moving at.
But it sounds like taking some things in people's personal lives when they're very comfortable using technology and speaking with technology, interacting, and moving that more into a financial services realm in terms of how our daily lives at work, quote unquote, are interacted with.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's actually a little bit of both, of hype and, but also there's a long runway. So I think a lot of people hook onto like consumer-facing kind of products that use AI, like phones and things like that, and then also even some of the latest and greatest kind of shiny objects and tools that are coming out into the market. You know, and there could be a lot of hype around that area, even though I do think there's also a long runway. But what people don't realize, to your point, is there's a lot of low-hanging fruiting use cases throughout the organization that people don't necessarily know is applicable to them. HR, procurement, supply chain, pricing, you know, pretty much any function or area within a company can benefit from using AI technology.
Sounds like middle back office has been a big focus in terms of financial services for some time and will continue to be, and front office maybe more so on the retail side. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Are there any particular models that AI models that you're seeing that are, you know, more practical, more popular, gaining more traction than others, or what should people be paying attention to?
You know, I think we're almost heading towards a world where it's either linear or deep. Because you can keep betting on linear models for a long time without going broke. They tend to be interpretable, they tend to be auditable. So an example, if I were to say, predict which clients are going to renew for a customer success team to work with them, I think most companies have a lot of have their success saying, well, let's take a few features, like some aspects of engagement, have they used this feature, have they used that, combine in a linear model, it's easy to turn to a health dashboard, see the components of it. That's understandable. But then more and more problems are highly nonlinear, anything from image classification to voice recognition, many kinds of fraud detection. Turns out deep learning has really high success. So we could almost imagine a world where in 20 years, everyone's either using linear models or deep learning models.
Interesting. Anyone else have perspective on that particular one?
I think I agree with the point in there. I would add for many of the data available thing, you talk about the fraud. I think the fraud is one thing, the sanctions, name screening of that one, and transaction monitoring, anti-money laundering. So those kind of things is very difficult, and also a lot of data coming, right? If you work on the ML perspective, right now, the nurse generating that suspicious activity is very inefficient. So you get 100, maybe a single digit of percentage is going to be actually the real suspicious activity. So from that perspective, the AI has a lot of the potentials you get in the combined with the big data together. So you think about one of the particular application in here, you get alert generated. From that alert, you're going to be hand over to a human being to evaluate, is this transaction good or not? And this particular operational, the human being is going to go to the internet, go to different places to find out particular transaction. Is this guy transaction going to Saudi Arabia? Are you going to build in some actual the factory in there or refinery or different things to verify if this transaction is good or not? So go to all the different places. And if we do build some methodology, emulate this human activity, then you get a lot of efficiency to be there. And for fraud, a similar thing. The fraud is going to be the actual loss of the company, of the bank. So they have a lot of actually motivation to build the fraud detection, those methodology to be there. I would say this one is a little bit not regulatory that much, right? From the bank perspective, if we do the capital model, I think that's going to be later on. It's not going to be initially getting regulatory approval for this, but you go to the marketing one, customer behavior of this, I think is going to be getting a lot of attraction.
Interesting.
Right.
So it sounds like, just to kind of summarize a little bit, you need some sort of sponsor, executive sponsor for a project. There has to be a real use case, and the stakeholders have to be identified and educated. I think there's another component that's missing that I want to call on Wendy to talk about a lot. Is the regulatory landscape. It's, you know, these aren't in our homes. We're playing in a highly regulated space. The certainty of raising capital is key. It affects monetary policy. It affects a lot of things. and it's not little monies. So understanding what are the rules of the road, what are people thinking about it, would be very helpful, I think, because I think it's a big piece of the overall equation for success and adoption.
Sure, thank you. So in addition to the any existing regulations that would apply in a given context for particular industries, such, for example, FCRA, and certainly with respect to use of data, GDPR, for example, where that would be applicable, we've started to see regulators and legislative bodies across the globe start to pay attention to AI-specific guidelines, rules of the road, proposed legislation is starting to emerge everywhere from France to Singapore to the US. And there are certain themes that are emerging with these early guidelines and best practices and proposed legislation and regulatory guidance. One of the themes is human centricity. So that could mean, depending on the jurisdiction and the particular context, could mean anything from how much, if any, human input is there going to be in the ultimate decision? Is there going, is a decision going to be purely a result of the algorithm, or will there be some human input into it? Human centricity could also go to how human roles that were previously performed by humans that now are performed by, in whole or in part, by AI. How does that play out? How does that impact, from a legal and regulatory perspective in a given jurisdiction, the workers affected? Other themes emerging are transparency and explainability. So transparency going to the notion of informing external parties that AI is being used in a given context. An example of that would be California's new chatbot law, which came into effect in July of this year, requiring any commercial use of chatbots interacting with consumers. The consumers have to be informed that they're interacting with a chatbot and not with a human being.
I see some worried faces in the audience.
So there's the transparency, and again, that could mean many things, but in a given context, the idea of it is notifying and being transparent about the use. And then explainability is more, somewhat more granular to particular decisions. How did particular input arrive at the given output? So those are two themes. We're also seeing themes of fairness, not lack of discriminatory impact, and of course the existing concerns around privacy. So going back to my comment before, some of the early guidance and recommendations that we're seeing call for AI impact assessments in certain cases. The proposed Algorithmic Accountability Act in the US calls for impact assessments in certain contexts. So again, it's important for organizations that may be impacted by this to determine and start having the conversations around the internal governance that they'll need to provide explanations to regulators, to provide the vetting that will need to be done to ensure that each use of AI complies with all of the the regulatory requirements and any ethical considerations, and also that will then pave the way to be prepared for formal impact assessments, if that comes into play, to determine when, if and when to engage third-party certifiers. Third-party certification is another concept that we're seeing starting to emerge. So this idea that a third party could come in and audit and vet and bless in a particular use of AI to address lack of unfair bias in both the data sets and the algorithm itself.
Wow, so I can imagine that this is not, these different assessments and different rules and regs and compliance and notifications, those don't happen overnight. So the amount of acceleration and traction going in even informed could take some time. And it also can maybe explain to folks who are in organizations trying to build out AI programs or other kind of technological programs, as well as those firms trying to get into financial services, why the acceleration changes from industry to industry. But you've literally laid out all of the landmines that I'm sure get stepped on regularly and that cause delays and change, and is there real buy-in for something?
So I think it is, helpful then for organizations to start gathering the right stakeholders to have the conversations and start having the conversations and consider whether it's appropriate to develop internal guidelines that incorporate some of these themes in advance of explicit regulation and legislation.
Are you also seeing the regulations being use cases in themselves? So regs being, for example, reg reporting.
Reg tech?
Yeah, reg tech,
Reg
compliance tech, but AI components to that and others here in terms of your education as well as what you're seeing in the industry?
So I think, as you pointed out before and as others have said, AI is, use cases across the board. So for regulatory compliance, there would be a number of use cases, legal, number of use cases, HR. Actually, sometimes people don't think about that, but across industries, there's, we're seeing use of HR for everything, AI and HR for gamification of the interview process, scoring of job candidates, for example.
Or reporting to chatbots rather than to people, certain things because of comfortability. So it sounds like one of the factors also is, again, education, but on a different slice of it, of the regulations that have to be checked in terms of financial services. But one theme, yeah, go ahead.
I just do want to add there, though, because it's very, it's emerging, and some jurisdictions are, ahead of others, and there may not be specific regulation yet, but we're starting to see guidance. We are starting to see some regulation. Regulators are articulating concerns, so to pay attention to what the regulators are talking about, where there are guidelines, where there's a model framework, for example, such as in Singapore. Okay,
makes a lot of sense, but it's tying back to these themes of transparency and explainability. Mm-hmm. So, and I know that's been other themes of other panels here. A particular topic that is explainability, but I'm talking about multidimensional, explaining it in layman's terms, not necessarily visualizations on like Tableau. So what do you all think about explainability, and how are you getting through to stakeholders to really understand? What's that tipping point of explainability that people are buying in? When do you see that buy-in kind of moment in terms of understanding?
So I think there's explainability because there's a regulatory issue. You have to actually be able to explain why you came to a decision. But then there's
Makes sense.
Yeah. Then there's the cultural kind of issue of how do you make sure you're a growing organization and you have now a use case, you want people to trust you. And a lot of times, data scientists tend to overcomplicate things initially, and it's and people are scared because they haven't they haven't built that trust yet. And a lot of
people are scared of data scientists.
Oh, sometimes. Yeah. But I think an important part of that is actually getting quick wins that are simple and easy to explain to get buy-in and build trust. Once you can actually...
So that shouldn't require a lot of explaining, right? Simple use cases, simple wins.
Right, simple use cases, but also simple methods that are explainable and how you actually... Because you can have a complicated solution to a simple problem. And I think that's a pretty common issue that a lot of people face is overcomplicating always wanting to start with the most complicated algorithm because they think it's going to give them the best result.
It is a theme of financial services, though. Overcomplicate things and call them lots of different things.
Yeah, but then people don't necessarily trust you because you can explain why you actually came to the decision. Sometimes even if the solutions are the outcome that you're presenting to them seems overly confident, and they don't know why. So I think that's an important thing. I've even experienced in my previous roles as data scientist as well as working as an educator for organizations is starting small, explaining and getting buy-in, especially for like non-digital native companies.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that part, right? So when we start building a model, so it's not really the data scientist the problem. It's going to be domain expertise coming together. So I think it's about almost 10 years ago, I used an example of my son. I was seeing my son at that time, he was born in early 1990, and every year he grows and the stock market grows. Until he's 10 years old, it grows a few hundred percentage. If using correlation, the correlation is almost 100%, 95% growth. But I can't use my son's age to be the factor determining where did the stock market go, right? So that's the domain knowledge coming. So there are going to be every feature we use, every driver we try to use is going to be reviewed and agreed with the domain expertise in that part. So not simply is the data. So it's not really a data-driven. It's going to be data-driven, but at the same time, it's going to be domain-driven. And I was very impressed yesterday, our Credit Suisse colleagues and talk about the pricing using machine learning one. I think it's that using historical data, but they still have some things behind. I think about the most recent crisis, right? You have stock down 800, 900 a day, but suddenly start coming up. So coming back. And I think but I think we have to realize behind the scenes, it's not really stock market not going down because the Federal Reserve put $4 trillion behind. And that could be the action taken and save the financial markets at that time. But if you're using the data itself, driven, with not knowing what's happening behind, so next time we are assuming implicitly, right, implied, the Federal is going to take similar actions when that happen. But that may not be the case. So many data, behind, even though it's true, even though this is the right driver, but you still need to find out what is exactly happening behind that. I think that's human do, and that's the algorithm should do that as well. May not be at this time, but in the future we're getting more now.
Very helpful.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to what Gordon and Michael had said was, when we think about explainability, don't wait until the end and try to explain everything. Explain early and often throughout the whole process. As you're building, as you're recognizing patterns, as you're discovering features, have those conversations with folks who may not be as comfortable with data science, but are the domain experts. Mm-hmm. And that'll help them be more comfortable with the process and understand and trust the outcomes.
It's also a two-way conversation.
Absolutely.
The data scientists are learning about the domain of the data that they're looking at.
Yep.
I'll say that I think a great place to look for low-hanging fruit in explainable AI is look for where people in an organization are already using rules of thumb, and then see how you can improve those rules of thumb. So an example is there's a lot of research in emergency room doctors. They work they're not going to do arithmetic if they're considering something like, do they intubate a patient? They tend to work with something a lot closer to a decision tree. And so if you can say, well, we train our model, we train based on large amounts of data, but the end result is something you should be able to explain to someone and they can do in their head. Think of all the businesses where people work, might be working without even access to a computer. Emergency room doctors, salespeople on a call, many kinds of traders. You could say maybe they're already using this rule of if a stock falls out of this particular range, we should get out of it. And just by improving, not saying, well, don't do that. Instead start from a random forest model, use this, overcomplicating, say, well, that kind of rule is good, but you're wrong that the range is 10%. The range is 20%. Are you wrong that these two factors matter? In fact, only the first of them matters, the second doesn't at all.
It sounds like start with the familiar, start with the small, and work your way from there
Start
for these
tweaking.
stakeholders.
Yeah.
And how do you present to different folks? Are you using and this is going to sound a little bit rudimentary, but are you showing them the underlying data sets? Are you visualizing them? How do you actually explain explainability to folks in terms of education?
Yeah, I think a good, I would definitely make some visualizations. I think a good example is, let's say marketing is evaluating leads based on 2 dimensions. They say, does the lead have a high job within an organization, and is the company a large one? Maybe you do some analysis and you discover, well, job matters a lot, but the company size doesn't actually matter. We haven't had bigger deals with big companies and small companies. So you can explain to them, well, here's a graph where we can see higher job titles have a higher and higher rate of conversion, but if you make the same graph based on the company size, it's flat. You could say the big companies have only a 22% chance of converting based on it compared to 20% of small companies. Those kinds of rules, I found organizations have a lot of hunger for those kinds of discoveries, and making it really I think that's why choosing the kinds of people that are teaching this, paying for people that are very strong communication and persuasion skills, that kind of data can stick in a company's culture and replace a lot of damaging lore.
Another way I would say make the business or stakeholder more comfortable with the algorithm or the results is you put a cage of the results, right? You try to exhaust what's input, but you try to find out where's the boundary of your output. Once the output, there could be some issues in there, but you know where it's going to be output range, and they will be much more comfortable. So I'm going to use in this morning's example, and for Amazon, the 18 million or 23 million that book price, right?
Of the book. Yeah.
So I would say that could be considered almost like a failure of whoever designed that model itself, the algorithm, because you're going to say I'm not going to sell this book lower than $10. I'm not going to expect it more than $1,000. So you should put a cage around the algorithm. So then your output is going to be within this range.
So you need a floor and a ceiling.
You have the range, boundary into there, right? So I think for any methodology, you should put the boundary condition or some constraint to be there as well. So it doesn't matter how your algorithm, if anything wrong, it's going to be as much as wrong in the room. So it's not going to be outside of the room, right?
Okay. With that, I want to kind of give final thoughts down the line, and then we'll open up for questions. Why don't we start with you?
So, yeah, I mean, I think I iterated earlier. You've heard throughout this that AI is not all hype, but it's not just investing in the appropriate technology and the technical skills, but it's also like a cultural change you have to see throughout your organization, and it's continued education throughout. And if you have those 3 components of education, culture, tech, and the technical skills as well, then I think you will see the actual worth and value of AI.
And are you saying that from a declarative statement, or you have a higher probability for people who are the data scientists in the room?
What do you mean?
Like in terms of success, you're not saying, hey, you follow these 3 things, definitely guaranteed success. You're just increasing your chances.
Yeah, I can't guarantee anything, but you're definitely increasing your chances. Yes.
Good.
I'd say the number one remaining advice I'd give is, when you add an initiative like we're going to invest in AI, treat it like any other initiative. Like if you hiring an executive, you should know exactly what you want out of it and know how you'll hold yourself and the new initiative accountable for it. So if you say we're getting AI because we want to improve our click-through rate, then you know what you want, and you can keep yourself accountable. If you say we want AI because we want to improve our decision making, then you can track it quantitatively based on how often internal dashboards are consulted, or that this many of our company goals will be replaced by this particular kind of metrics. I think, so like I said, that's the same as any other large change within a company.
Anything to avoid?
Thing to avoid.
Any kind of no-nos?
So many. That's sad.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to tell them that the path's the right. Let's continue.
So I think I would say focus on motivating people to use AI. because when you talk about AI is going to either, like you so often hear AI is going to replace me, or is AI going to replace a data scientist, or is AutoML going to replace a data scientist, all this stuff. It's just noise. And if you can motivate people in the organization where they're learning, like I think one of the coolest things about AI is when AI gives you some information where suddenly you learn something new, right? You're constantly learning and you're like, holy cow, I didn't know that had an impact on the outcome. And so if you can teach people that they're always learning, use AI to learn and make themselves better, empower them to work together as teams so that it's fun solving new problems, and then ultimately you belong to something bigger, right? Like if you're on the team figuring out how to use voice prints to help security and it has this humongous impact on your organization, that's pretty fulfilling to be part of something like that. So I really think that you focus on motivating folks to leverage AI, and it's so exciting as opposed to the taking people out of it. Like humanize AI and make it really fun. And
Do you think that there will be people that won't buy into it no matter what?
oh yeah.
Okay. So you have to get a critical mass, not necessarily everybody.
There's always going to be people, but there's going to be a lot more people that I think are open to it. And once they start getting excited about it, I've seen it in multiple organizations, that you start getting people excited about it, and suddenly you're finding business value all across your organization that no one even thought about. It's really, really cool.
Sounds like a good type of contagious.
Yeah, it is.
Wendy?
So I would reiterate, think about governance early on, and think about who needs to be brought to the table to implement the right level of governance for vetting use of AI, and for determining what guidelines the organization is going to follow as best practices. And I would say that conversation and that group of folks might be broader than you initially think.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, this truly is, so cross-functional, and we'd already mentioned, obviously data scientists, IT, legal, regulatory, risk, but even functions such as procurement. Don't forget the practical. For example, if you're going to use a chatbot in a call center that is going to interact with software that previously humans were interacting with under user-based licenses, what happens? How do you then, what do you have to do? What kind of conversations do you have to have with the vendors for that software to give them the news that whereas there were maybe 1,000 users and now you're going to 1, what do you do? So many practical considerations, and that's why they're going to need to be different voices at the table to identify all of these needs.
So it's a real level of preparation and planning to establish the right type of framework that includes governance, stakeholder education, what do these people need to get comfortable, and the practicalities of this. And also, I would imagine, like we said earlier, this doesn't happen overnight. This takes time, a reinforcement of education. And Gordon, what do you think?
I would say make it simpler for the stakeholder, for the user.
That's great.
So you find the problem, right? You have to resolve the problem. So in the end, the AI is a tool, so it's not the purpose. At least for financial services, you have to find the real problem. Maybe it's a bottleneck, maybe it's something inefficiency to resolve it. Once you resolve the data or resolve the problem itself, and the stakeholder, whoever using it, has to be simpler than before. So of course, you have to put all the different efforts. Doesn't matter how complicated is your algorithm or solution, but in the end, the final solution for the user has to be simpler.
Well, makes perfect sense. And with that, we have about 11 minutes left for questions on the high end. So if there are any, we're happy to, I think there'll be a mic going around if there are any. Or I'll just start calling on people. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Hey, this is a question for Wendy and Gordon. So how much of your attention and time goes towards identifying and promoting potential new opportunities in AI versus how much of your attention and time goes towards protecting organizations from pitfalls and dangers in AI ideas that come from other parts of the organization?
Well, I would answer in the same time, right? So, because one of the major tasks, our mandate of the risk is protecting the bank. So from the risk. So that's one major thing. The other one is supporting the growth. So from that perspective, I would say try to resolve the issue. Everything is based on these two, either making more profit or protecting the bank from the risk happening. And from that side, we build in the model, so we make sure, and that's keep that in mind, and regulation, everything in mind, and working with the business together. And from the particular timing split, I would say they're going to be 20-30% of time you're trying to find what's the issue and how you try to resolve it more efficiently. So the problem very likely today is manually or some kind of solution already in there. So that one may be effective, but may not be efficient. You want to find a solution, has to be effective and efficient. I would say there's still a lot of room to go now, a lot.
So I'll answer that just generally as to legal profession with respect to AI, not my particular role. I think it would be a more helpful answer. So certainly, legal profession on the one hand is going to be impacted in and of itself in multiple ways by use of AI tools to assist attorneys and to be used in the justice system and so forth. And there's already, as I'm sure you're aware, just a booming field of legal tech that's emerging right now. And AI is a really important part of that, NLP tools, et cetera. And then, the other piece of it, and some of what I touched on today, is all of the many, many legal issues, regulatory issues that will be raised by clients' use of AI. So that is a very exciting space, really interesting. So much, and I know this is not an audience of lawyers, so not the right ones to talk about, but we talked a little bit about the regulatory and contractual considerations. There's so much in terms of IP, for example, IP considerations, liability around AI, that it's a very exciting time to be a lawyer looking at these issues.
Just a quick question. In terms of preparing your organization for AI, I think failure is an important topic, right? And that things tend to, there's not a high percentage of AI projects that succeed immediately. So just curious about how you manage failure. What's a reasonable time frame to focus on a use case and then move on, and maybe some guardrails in terms of managing expectations, et cetera?
If we can start on this one, I would say the culture, right? To talk about how to prepare the company. The culture itself is not only just the same doing the training, make sure you're supporting, but also the structure change. So you set up particularly, you do want to set up some organization leading this innovation, and for their part, so you need to give them some authority. Not everyone is doing that, but that certainly is the critical step to go in there. And at the same time, and you do, and it's like we do here, do the POC for different things, and you want to be, we call it is the quick and no regret. So let's say you do a POC, you want to do it, and you just, in 4 weeks, you're not going to be succeeding too much. Using very simple example and taking the critical steps, methodology to do that, you will say, are you going to succeed or not? You maybe make a decision quickly. You are saying, yeah, we want to take this to next step, and or no, we want to stop it. So that one could be, should be very quickly. But after that one, you should not regret. So I should take more time or go in some other. If coming again, you do that again. No one is going to criticize anyone saying, why didn't you follow up or different things, right? I think there was an open example from HSBC doing the TripAdvisor for restaurants. So should we supporting the better rating, the 5-star, 4-star, those restaurants in the from TripAdvisor? It seems like reasonable. I should do that. But when actually doing this, doing the data analysis, no, those restaurants, they are higher probability of defaults. The reason don't know that. So because maybe they paid too much attention to customer service, maybe they didn't really take care of the cutting the cost. The smaller, the slightly lower rating, those restaurants, they survive actually longer. So that one, in a few weeks, they get data and they have this conclusion, then they stop it in their part.
It's a question up front. Question over
We
there.
have one over here.
Oh, there's a mic over there. Okay. There you go.
All right.
It's dark over there. Can't see.
So as we start using AI and machine learning more and more and more, we're starting to realize it's less and less auditable. Are you seeing any organizations, ISO standards, IOSCO, whatever, or somebody coming in and saying, hey, these are tests you need to run to make sure there's no bias or that you're not having concentration risk in your decision making or groupthink or whatever? Like one of the big worries we see across a lot of organizations, and banks included, are everybody wants to make the same decision because the AI said we ought to go that way, and now we have a momentum, and then now you have essentially a consolidation of a massive risk or an issue or whatever. Are you seeing any organizations coming across saying, here's a bunch of guidelines to test for, to create a risk profile for your AI or anything like that?
I don't know who wants to field it.
Well, I think this one here, right, is across the organization. I don't think we have anything that concrete yet, but from first line, second line, and third line defense, everyone's starting to draft their standards, right? So it's not going to be just the same, going to be results coming there. I could see this one. I haven't seen anyone from the banks already doing the capital models being succeeded using the AI or machine learning, and they are all using traditional methodology and for capital model. And I heard someone doing FRS 9 using the machine learning from one bank, but that one is still not capital model. It's being used for reserve calculation for that part. So I think it's the bank just started. I don't think we have so many concrete examples to making or some mistakes or something like that yet, no. But every standard is coming, and for all the 3 lines of defense.
I agree. I just think there's lots of industry groups that are starting to, circle up around these topics. And right now, as Wendy and others were mentioning, they're going through basic, and not basic in terms of rudimentary. They're going through traditional channels and being measured against traditional things. But until the education's there and the industry groups and regulators continue to focus on these topics, I think you'll see the emergence of ISO standards, FIBO standards, and others around these topics.
So I think to an extent we're in the wild west of AI and data science. I think it's a somewhat dangerous time to be in it, but it's also in many ways exciting. I think there's a danger of writing the rules too early.
And I think that's why we're seeing at this stage more of the the higher level principles that are being articulated rather than the granular requirements and standards that you're talking about. I believe that NIST is looking at and developing standards. So we'll see how granular those are. But so far it's been at the higher level.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that was a good question. I got my answer. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
Many of you spoke about having different voices at the table when you're deciding about AI culture in a firm. So whilst that is absolutely important, how do you make that process effective without stifling or compromising speed of execution or innovation? It's always 2 sides of the story. How do you make that a much more streamlined process in an org?
That's a great question. And, one of the again, one of the themes that's emerging with respect to impact assessment, for example, is the circumstances under which an impact assessment would be required. So for high-risk decisions, high-risk systems, perhaps the high-level governance conversation could include categories that are going to be, I would think, I don't want to use the phrase under the radar, but I would think that there would be different levels of scrutiny applied within a governance system. And so it would be very organization, very industry, very context specific.
I'll say I think there's a very important role of a role like chief data scientist can be a leader and a manager, but also kind of a product manager. I think we're seeing more and more people in a sort of data product manage role whose job it is to listen to all the stakeholders, bring them together, bring in a little expertise, and then set a path forward. And that is a way to have the collaboration without a slowdown in productivity.
And with that, I just want to thank the panelists for doing this and all the great questions. Thank you. Great job, guys.